The reality is when Jesus becomes your Lord, he is the Lord of everything. There is not a single area of your life that he is not in charge of. So, should that include how you function as an employee, employer, a husband, a wife, a parent, a child? Yep. And it also should make a difference on how you look in the world of politics as well, should it not?
But it's important for us oftentimes to revisit the reality of the design of God for the institution of the state. And the way we find out what that design looks at is not only through the blueprints that God has given to us, for example, in Romans chapter 13 and in 1 Peter, but also through the stories in which God acts in accordance with his design and those who are involved in those social systems. So what we find from the very beginning is when God designed the state, and remember we were talking yesterday about a biblical worldview and how God has given us his truth, his design in every area of life. There is no area in life that you can sail to or hike or walk in which God has not spoken. And he has given us the truth and the design, how he has made the world, how he has made the social order that we exist in and the design for that. And yesterday we talked about the consequences that come to us when we choose to defy that.
These had devout biblical worldviews. And they understood that it was God that established the home. So when they sought direction on the decisions they should make concerning their own homes, they went to the pages of Scripture. They understood that it was God that established the church. So as they were breaking away from the Anglican church, well, where would they go for instruction on their function in the church? Well, they went to the pages of Scripture. And they also understood, Genesis 9:6, that it was God that came up with the idea of civil government. So if they wanted instruction on how they should organize their civil government, they also went to the pages of Scripture. As a matter of fact, the historian John Pelfrey said in 1859 that the Puritans searched the Bible for principles that could be incorporated into civil law, things that we now take for granted. America was at one time an exceptional country. Why? Because at least our original 13 were established on a firm biblical worldview. So we choose to have taken what God has given to us, unalienable rights, then we, the people, delegate certain limited responsibility to this civil body politic created by us, answerable to us, of, by, and for us, recallable by us. We limit the power and we delegate what they can and cannot do. Look at some of the writings of our earliest forefathers. John Davenport, a pastor in Boston, in his discourse on civil government, he says, the power of the government originates in the people, that they may measure out so much power that they may give it out conditionally, so as if the condition be violated, they may resume their power of choosing another. They can choose another governor. They can choose another government. That's what it says in the Declaration, that we maintain the ability to alter, abolish, or throw off if the government becomes tyrannical. But folks, what I want you to understand is the power doesn't lie in they, the government. The power rests in we, the people. Look at what Thomas Hooker had to say. Pastor Thomas Hooker, the founder of Connecticut, said this in a letter to John Winthrop, 1638, the foundation of authority is laid firstly in the free consent of the people. Where does the power lie? They, the government? No, we, the people. Look at what Pastor Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, had to say. He said, the sovereign, original, and foundation of civil power lies in the people. And it is evident that such governments as are by them erected and established have no more power, nor for no longer time, that the civil power or people consenting and agreeing shall be trust with them. Where does all the power lie? We, the people. It was with these three basic truths that this group met in Philadelphia in 1787. Now, by the way, this was not a kumbaya, let's all hold hands and sing moment. This was fierce political squabbling. There were large states, small states, slave states, free states. There's question as whether they had the justification to throw out the Articles of Confederation, which was our existing Constitution to begin with. There was all sorts of stuff going on here. But one of the biggest arguments was between two political parties. Imagine that. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists wanted to create a stronger, as they called it, central government. The Anti-Federalists, men like Patrick Henry, said, wait a second. By the way, he was not at this meeting because he thought it was a sham. He didn't even go. But the Anti-Federalists said, wait a second. We don't want to give too much power there. We just fought 4 years ago to free ourselves from a tyranny. Do we really want to run the risk of creating another tyranny? But they were assured there was nothing to worry about. That can't happen. Well, why, pray tell, can't it happen? Because we've written it all down in the Constitution, and we have defined the powers of the new central government. As a matter of fact, in Federalist 45, it says this: the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. How many of you think that they think that their power is still few and defined? Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. The powers reserved to the several states will extend to all objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people and the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. So everything that took place around the border, including negotiating with other countries, was the responsibility of this new central government. Everything that took place inside the boundaries, especially everything that took place within each sovereign state, was not the federal government's business. They don't have the constitutional authority to go there. But what happens if they do? Oh, I know. I was taught in school. That's where the Supreme Court steps in. Folks, that's nonsense. That's nowhere in the Constitution. Federalist 33 tells us what the response is supposed to be. Who is to judge of the necessity and propriety of the laws to be passed for executing the powers of the Union? If the federal government should overpass the just bounds of its authority and make a tyrannical use of its powers, the people whose creature it is must appeal to the standard they have formed and take such measure to redress the injury done to the Constitution. Remember natural law. That who is created is subject to the Creator. Ladies and gentlemen, Washington did not create the states. The states created this central government, designed it, the three branches, and then limited what things they could and could not do. And then we didn't leave it up to a branch of the federal government to determine whether the federal government was breaking the law. Does that make any sense to you? Imagine if I was in a disagreement with my friend Dan Fisher and I asked my mom to come and decide between us. You know what? I think she's going to be a little bit partial towards me.
And then you multiply that by 10 or 100 or 1,000 and you will find the consequences associated with what happens when the king begins to think he can do whatever he wants.
Now, if you think about all 50 states, there are certain things that all of us have in common, many more than what I'm going to mention here. But just think with me for just a moment that all of the states have official borders. You know when you've crossed into or out of a particular state because those borders are official. Secondly, all states have some type of state constitution. That photograph was of our original convention of statehood. Here is a copy of our state constitution. So all states have state constitutions. On top of that, all states have a state capital, and these are official capitals, not symbolic, official. There's our capital. All states have a legislature, most of them bicameral, just like in Washington, D.C. And these legislatures are official, elected by the people, duly sworn in with the authority to govern. State legislatures. And then, of course, we have, in almost every state, a chief executive officer that is normally called a governor. And then you could also add to it, we have a state judiciary, we have a state Supreme Court. I mean, you can just go right down the line. Now, my question to you is this: if we have all of those things, and yet all of those things are trumped by Washington, D.C., then what need do we have for those things at the state level? What use are state borders? What use is a state constitution or a state legislature? or a state executive officer, or any of the other designations that states officially have, if all they are is to be trumped by a federal office, officer, or some type of tribunal. If indeed Washington, D.C. is the final authority, the final arbiter on everything, then why do we need these designations at the state level? In fact, I stood on the floor of the House of Representatives last year in arguing in favor of the Obamacare nullification bill, and I suggested that rather than spending $120 million or so to repair the Capitol, if Washington, D.C. is the final authority, why not sell this Capitol, make a great museum, save the citizens $120 million, lay off all of the legislators, that'd save the taxpayers more money, shred the state constitution, get rid of all of these designations, and just rent some office space downtown Oklahoma City and call it the Federal Office for the District of Oklahoma. Now I want you to think with me about that for just a moment. If we're a nation, then all of that makes sense. In fact, if we're a nation, this capital is irrelevant compared to that capital. Why do we need these redundancies? Actually, we don't.
We live in a federal republic, not a national government. There is a major difference. So when everyone talks about the national government, the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., it's a myth. In fact, in 1787, when the founding generation was at Philadelphia, the framers who wrote the Constitution, that proposal was put before them. Let's have a national government. It was rejected outright. So we're going to talk about the states and the general government. What does that term state mean? And of course, some of the stuff I'm going to cover tomorrow, so I want to tease you a little bit with that because I'm going to get into some of these terms. But general government. We have a general government in Washington, D.C., not a federal government, not a national government. We have a general government that does general things. Everything else was left to the states. The Congress, the President, the Supreme Court of the United States are all complicit in declaring obviously unconstitutional legislation constitutional. They've done it over and over again. So what do? Do we lie supinely on our backs, as Patrick Henry said, and hug the elusive phantom of hope? Please stop. Until we're bound hand and foot? The rightful remedy, as Thomas Jefferson said, and James Madison said in 1798, was nullification. So let's talk about this word nullification. You might have heard it before. Maybe you think it's a bad word. There's fear over this word. And there are even many famous individuals on the conservative side who will tell you this is illegal. It doesn't work. You can't do this. It's a bad word. Well, they'll even tell you it's lawlessness. There was a Duke law professor, of course, considered the source, who said in debate that nullification is lawlessness. Well, how? Because nullification is the action of the sovereign people of the sovereign states. That's not lawlessness. That's being law-abiding. You're actually telling the general government, you're breaking the law, and we're going to stop you. So, nullification by definition is an act by the state legislature designed to nullify or void unconstitutional legislation passed by the general government of the United States. The key word there being unconstitutional legislation. No one's saying if the general government passes constitutional legislation, we're going to nullify that. Only if it's unconstitutional. Well, there will be a lot of it nowadays, probably about 90% at least. The state would then interpose, block, between the general government and the people of the state, thereby acting as a hedge to protect the people of the state from unconstitutional legislation. So unconstitutional is a key word in the definition. Why? Well, because the Constitution, as Pastor Blair talked about and I'll talk about tomorrow, has certain defined powers. It is a written constitution as opposed to an unwritten constitution. It's a very important distinction to make. But those defined powers are found in Article 1, Sections 7 through 10. Now, 10 is an interesting article in the Constitution because that defines what the states cannot do. But essentially what they did in that article is say, well, look, everything we gave, everything we delegated to the general government, you can't do. And there are very few things that are delegated to the general government. Roger Sherman of Connecticut said, one excellency of the Constitution is that when the government of the United States acts within its proper bounds, it will be the interest of the legislatures of the particular states to support it. But when it overleaps those bounds, this is what we're talking about now, and interferes with the rights of the state governments, they will be powerful enough to check it. Well, we've got countless issues where the central government or the general government has overleaped its bounds. Now the states have to check it. Well, that becomes the question. How do you do it? How do you check it? Oliver Ellsworth, also of Connecticut, suggested that the states could not be coerced by force. You can't send in the army without the state's consent. Now, it's happened, but you can't do it without the consent of the state and the people of the state. So solutions must be found through the legal system. But again, what happens if the legal system is complicit? Well, then Jefferson and Madison had a different solution, going back to the colonial period. It's called nullification.
Now, in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, which were clearly unconstitutional, James Madison wrote the Virginia Resolution, and in 1799, Thomas Jefferson writes the Kentucky Resolution. We're not going to have time to go through all of this, but many have not ever read the Virginia Resolution. And so I want you to notice just some of the words. In the case of deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are in duty bound to interpose. You ever heard about nullification? Interpose. For arresting the progress of the evil. In other words, according to Madison in the Virginia Resolution, 1798, subverting the power of the states is evil. Their intent, they said, to consolidate the states by degrees into one sovereignty, the obvious tendency and inevitable result of which would be to transform the present republican system of the United States into an absolute, or at best, a mixed monarchy. Now I want you to listen to the words. 1798, just 10 years after the ratification of the Constitution, they are warning that if the states are subverted and their authority is diminished, it would reduce us into an absolute, or at very best, mixed monarchy.
We're very familiar with this verse. In fact, we love it. We quote it all the time. 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, this day and age, be us, which are called by my name, would humble themselves and pray and seek my face. God, not my will, but yours. Oh God, I want you to smile upon me. Oh God, we need your blessings. Oh God, direct us and turn from their wicked ways. Then I will hear from heaven, and I'll forgive their sin, and I'll heal their land. Folks, we all love this verse. We love the way it ends, and we embrace that promise, and we say, oh God, when will you hear from heaven? When will you forgive our sin? When will you heal our land? Only after we have turned from our wicked ways. Ladies and gentlemen, did you know in the great state of Oklahoma, this bastion of conservatism, the buckle of the Bible Belt, we killed between 6,000 and 7,000 unborn babies last year? God help us. Is that turning from your wicked ways? We have passed an amendment to our state constitution, reinforcing God's definition of natural marriage. Now, one politically appointed black-robed czar has determined that he's going to thumb his nose at God and shred our Constitution and the will of 74% of the great state of Oklahoma. Folks, he cannot do that legally. But in 1973, it wasn't legal what Roe versus Wade did either. And the Christians sat on their hands, and we now have the blood of some 55 million babies on us. Are we going to just sit and wring our hands and say, oh, what a pity about marriage? Or are we going to turn from our wicked ways? We run about $1 trillion a year nationally, I hate that term anymore, in a deficit. And we always point our fingers at Washington and say, oh, those guys shouldn't be doing that. Folks, we are complicit because we can't compromise our principles and values fast enough to accept bribes from Washington. We are complicit in the national debt. So, will we? Are we willing to turn from our wicked ways? Folks, you've learned tonight that we actually have the ability. It's not vote, hope, and cope. It's not beg at the feet of the Supreme Court for them to do something. The sovereign states are who establish the general government. The general government only has authority that we delegated to it. It's up to us to say no when they get outside the box that we put them in. Look at the words of Thomas Jefferson, not Paul Blair. The several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government, but that by a compact under the style and title of Constitution for the United States and of amendments thereto, they constituted a general government for special purposes, delegated to that government certain definite powers, reserving each state to itself the residuary mass of right to their own self-government, and that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force, that to this compact each state acceded as a state and as an integral part to its co-states forming as to itself the other party, that the government created by this compact was not made the exclusive or final judge of the extent of the powers delegated to itself, since that would have made its discretion and not the Constitution the measure of its powers, but that as in all other cases of compact among powers having no common judge, each party has an equal right to judge for itself as well of infractions of the mode and measure of the redress. Folks, did you realize we have the ability to stop abortion in the state of Oklahoma? Did you know any of this when you came in tonight? What do you think would happen if 3.8 million Oklahomans were able to learn what you now know, recognizing that the power has all along rested in the hands of we the people? What would happen? Folks, I think we could encourage our legislature, and we've got many legislators here tonight. And I think we could encourage our governor, as we have recently with her rescinding Common Core. We were successful in that. That was we the people, educated people. That was not something she wanted to do. She was a proponent for it, but she heard the voice of the people. A couple of years ago, she had accepted over $50 million of health care exchange money from the federal government. Again, where did they get the money? I thought we were running a deficit. How'd they come up with $50 million to offer to us? And she accepted it initially until she heard the voice of we the people and sent it back. We are the government of the state of Oklahoma. And our legislators will listen to us, but we have to, our 1,000 plus here this evening, reach the other 3.8 million. So this is where you come in. This is where our strategy is. We're going to run a campaign on knowledge. Unfortunately, we aren't a very intellectual society anymore. People don't read 500-page books. They listen to television commercials. They listen to radio commercials. They do 1-minute, 2-minute, 3-minute YouTubes. So we are going to have to be very sophisticated and basically run a campaign for liberty in the state of Oklahoma. Here's what we have budgeted to do if we can get the cooperation and raise the money to do it. We plan to run 60 30-second radio spots every day on talk, rock, and country in Oklahoma City and Tulsa for 13 weeks during the legislative session. That will cost about $200,000. We plan to run television commercials for 3 weeks, one 30-second commercial during the evening news on each of the major networks in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Again, for 3 weeks during the legislative session. That will cost about $100,000. We plan to run half-page ads in the Sunday paper in Oklahoma City and in Tulsa for 5 consecutive weeks. That will cost about $50,000. We need a full-time staff member that can devote his time to traveling the state, meeting with small groups, and coordinating our grassroots efforts. A salary of about $65,000. We need a full-time assistant, a salary of $25,000. We need technology, internet, email, Twitter, Facebook, $20,000. Academic counsel, men like Brion McClanahan that we can call and have on the payroll to give us direction in some of these arguments and issues. We need rent, phone, and utilities. We need miscellaneous expenses altogether. Now, this is a bare bones. Quite frankly, we could use double this or triple this. Think of how much money was poured into the U.S. Senate campaign. And that's going to get us nothing. Folks, let me tell you, we've had one of the best senators in history in Tom Coburn. Well, we're still hold on a second, let me make the point. We're still $17.5 trillion in debt. We're still murdering babies every year. The answer is not in Washington. The answer is in the state of Oklahoma. Go ahead. Now that's worthy of an applause. You say, that's an awful lot of money. Yeah, I'd agree with you. That is an awful lot of money. But we've got people in this room that have the wherewithal to write a check, and they could do that if this is really important. But here's what I'm asking to do. If we had 1,000 people that were willing to contribute $10 a week, that's $1.35 a day for 1 year. 1,000 people that will join together and not just talk. Oh, I'm going to quote 2 Chronicles 7:14. Oh, isn't it terrible? 55 million babies murdered. Oh, isn't it terrible what Washington's doing? Shut up. I'm tired of hearing it. We've got an opportunity to actually do something about it. Will you join us? That's the question. Will you join us? 1,000 people that would do $10 a week. Make a commitment. Gentlemen, would you pass out the envelopes, please? Just hand them down the aisles. We're going to give you an envelope. And I'm going to ask you, if you would, to prayerfully consider what's on this envelope. We've got options here for you to be able to commit for 1 year. You can contribute weekly or monthly or quarterly. I've got a box here to commit for $45 a month for 12 months. That'll get this done. That's what I'm talking about here. $45 a month. I think virtually everybody in this room can afford that. Some can do far more than that. Some may just want to make one large contribution. Some may want to have a credit card draft. Folks, we need the support. $500,000 is a lot of money. But divided amongst 1,000 people, divided over 52 weeks, it's really not. It's less than a cup of coffee every day. But is it important? Ladies and gentlemen, we have been told every 4 years that this is the most important election of our lifetime. If we rally around the party, we'll take back Washington. How has that worked for us? The first time I had a chance to vote for president was the re-election of Ronald Reagan. My goodness, I didn't realize that was the high water mark. But the sad thing is, as I look back at this, ladies and gentlemen, in 1980, over 204 years of our country's history, we fought 2 world wars. We fought our war for independence. We had the Civil War. We had the Spanish-American War. We had the War of 1812. We had all of this. 204 years, we had accumulated $1 trillion in debt. That's it. In the last 34 years, we have gone from $1 trillion to $17.5 trillion. Now, I've always been the guy that said, well, it's those dirty Democrats. If we could just get the Democrats out of office, we'd be better. Folks, let me tell you, over the last 34 years, we've had 20 years of Republican presidents. We're complicit. One thing that really turned the lights on for me, I saw on Fox News on a Saturday morning within the last year and a half, had 2 expert commentators get up here back to back, and one of them just made the observation that there are 12,000 lobbyists in Washington. Isn't that comforting? And the next one made the statement that 8 of the 10 wealthiest counties in America surround Washington, D.C. What a coincidence. Folks, Washington is not going to restrain itself. It doesn't matter who we send there because of the sin nature of man. Washington is too profitable just the way it is. The only way we're going to restrain the growth and overspending in Washington is if those who created it will actually rein it back in. That's where we have the opportunity to act. That's where we must act. I ask you, join with us. Fill this out, drop a check in it. Visit our table on the way out. Take it home with you. Pray about it tonight. Look at it. Set it right there on your kitchen table and stare at it before you go to bed. And pray if God would have you to do something. Edmund Burke says all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Let me say we have churches across our state full of good men doing exactly this. I'm going to close with 3 slides. First of all, I want to make this statement. We talked a while ago about the condition that the country was in when the 18th century church had the courage to stand in the face of tyranny. Here you see some religious leaders pledging their allegiance to Adolf Hitler with political leaders. This slide comes from the United States Holocaust Museum, and it talks about the condition of the German church during the rise of Nazism. They were having economic troubles. They had a charismatic leader come to power. One of his ideas to resolve the problem was to get rid of the sovereign states and unify under national socialism. Well, a lot of the church thought it was a good idea. As a matter of fact, this segment said some of them were all for it. They liked this fiery new leader, brought back national pride. Some recognized how dangerous this was. You're going to learn about this tomorrow. Oh, you've got to be here. This presentation that Dell is going to do on the state is phenomenal. Some recognized the dangerous path that we were going down, tried to stop it. But most simply wanted to remain neutral. Christians just didn't want to get involved. Oh, we might lose our tax exemption. Oh, they might say some bad things about us. You know, history tells us that there were 6 million Jews that ultimately died in the concentration camps. I bet if we had a chance to give them a vote, they would have said, "Hey, church, do something." There were some 12 million altogether that died in those concentration camps. Hey, if we could hear their blood crying out from the ground, they would have said, "Hey, church, why don't you do something before it's too late?" There were over 40 million people that died in the European theater alone, both civilian and military personnel. Boy, if they had a chance to vote, I bet you they would have voted that the church got off its butt and did something. One of the men that attempted to do something was this gentleman, courageous pastor named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Before it was all over, he wound up giving his own life as he was doing everything he could to try to save the lives of others and head off what was going on in his country. Bonhoeffer made this statement. He said, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act."
It is past time for those who call upon the Lord to call upon the Lord. Who will call us back to our senses? Will it be an 81-year-old? A 21-year-old? A housewife? I don't know who it will be. But I'm hoping it's going to be a bunch of radical Oklahomans. And I want to tell you this in the closing minute here. If you choose to do what has been laid before you to do, we've already talked about you better have courage. And it better be a commitment. But I can guarantee you, I will gather every individual I can, and we're going to stand behind you. They will come from Colorado. They will come from Tennessee. They'll come from Georgia. They'll come from Kansas. They'll come from every place that we can gather them together, and they will stand behind you. Because I think it's time. But I also think, my dear friends, that if this is not done on your knees before God, then you'll be fighting this alone.
The United States are. After the war, we said the United States is. There's something very significant about that shift. The shift is, before 1861, states believed that they were the sovereign power, voluntarily participating in a union. After the war, the common belief, at least by those who won the war, was that the states are really irrelevant, and that it's all about the United States of America federally. Most believers do not know that. They simply do not know that. But I'll take it a step further. Most of your legislators either do not know that or they do not believe that. This past February, we celebrated the 23rd annual Rose Day observance at the Capitol. Probably many of you were there. It's when we go to the Capitol and we rally for life, and you go to the office of your representative, your senator, and you give them a rose encouraging them to vote pro-life. They ran pro-life. You expect them to be pro-life, and they tell you they are pro-life. But here's the part that many don't know. There's very little pro-life legislation that makes its way through the legislature. And that which does has little to no effect. And the actual organizations in the state that claim to be pro-life will fight, as they did my measure this year, any bill that has any real substance that would actually stop abortion. They'll actually fight it. They did. So here's what you must understand. Probably there's not a one of us in this room who is not excited about the prospect of ending abortion in Oklahoma. I believe we have that power. Paul is correct. We've always had that power. It's like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. She always had the power to go back to Kansas. All she had to do was click her heels together and say she wanted to go back home. But she didn't know that. We've always had the power. The problem is, it's going to take more than rallying and flag waving and passing out roses. It's one thing to talk about this. It's another thing to attempt to do it. The progressives in this country understand that everything hinges on keeping the states believing that they are subservient to the central government. And they are willing to give everything they have, I believe, to preserve abortion, because in my mind, abortion is the kingpin. You overturn abortion, and the whole sweater comes unraveled. The whole house of cards begins to fall when states realize that there is no provision in the U.S. Constitution to force people to allow babies to be murdered in their states. The very first unalienable right mentioned in the Declaration is the right to life. If we destroy the lives of the most innocent among us, who else's lives are safe? Well, no one if you happen to be inconvenient. And guess what? You are inconvenient. You know that, don't you? Okay, if you're a fundamental Christian, or if you are a strong conservative and believe in original intent, you are a problem. So here's the deal. We can clap our hands to this, and we should. But I want you to know something. This will be a fight like none this state has ever experienced. I think none. Every power that the feds have, including their lapdog media, will be brought down on us with as strong of a fist as is possible. They cannot allow this to happen, because if it happens here, it'll happen in other states, and they know it. So I want to give you a sober word of warning. Some of us will lose reputations in the press through the NSA. Even though they can't find Lois Lerner's emails, they can find yours. But here's something worse than that. I believe they have the power to plant stuff into your emails and onto your cell phone. They can make a pedophile out of you if you've never looked at one piece of pornography that involves children. They can plant phone calls into your phone records that you never made, but it's all legitimate as far as the records are concerned. How are you or I going to refute that? Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but I'm telling you that's what could happen. The IRS, it has so many laws that are so ambiguously written that all of us are in breach of some tax law, even though we don't mean to be. And if they want to make us tax dodgers, they will. They tried to destroy Paul Blair's reputation in his hometown over a $25 tax bill that he didn't even know they hadn't paid years ago, and tried to make him, and by the way, these were conservative Republicans who were doing this, tried to make him look like a tax dodger. Now, I'm just trying to warn you what this really means. This is not a Rose Day event, because that ain't going to change abortion. This is a watershed moment. And if we're not up for the fight, we better not get in it. Jesus said no man fights a battle until he first sits down and decides that with a certain number of soldiers, he can go up against the enemy with their certain number of soldiers. No one decides to build a house unless he first sits down and calculates whether or not he has the materials and the resources to be able to complete the project. Because in either case, you'll either be a laughing stock or a horrible failure. Now, life is one of those issues that I'm willing to go down swinging over. And I'll bet you are too. But don't forget, we might go down. Are we ready for that? Most of your conservative legislators in Oklahoma believe that nullification is unconstitutional. That debate that I participated in about Obamacare, year before last, in my very first year in the House, my desk mate at the time, who is considered to be a leader among the conservatives in Oklahoma, once I gave my impassioned speech, because my responsibility was to talk about state sovereignty. We divided up the subjects. When I sat down, he looked at me and he said, Dan, I completely agree with you, but you know this leads to secession. I believe nullification is unconstitutional and I won't vote for it. And he's one of the leaders of the conservatives in Oklahoma. Right now, your legislature will not pass this. I could call the legal staff and make this one of my bills for 2015. They'll write it. It can be written. It will be probably scheduled to be heard in some committee, more than likely states' rights in the House anyway. But it would probably not get past that committee. This fight cannot be led from the top down.
Right.
I can try, but I just want you to know right now, and I'm not a pessimist about this, I will fail. Your legislators, your 72 Republicans in that House, will not take this kind of heat. And the Senate certainly won't. They're made out of wax anyway. I mean, little heat and they just melt into a puddle. Although I think the puddle is some other liquid other than wax, but that's a different story. So here, I have the most unenviable job here, and that is to bring the negative into this discussion. We're all for ending abortion. You clap your hands at this, rightfully so. But friends, this can only happen if we get the citizens to force their legislature to stand up to Goliath. And this is the only way that it will happen. It will not happen any other way. Now, I've already told Paul this, and I'm in this. But I personally do not think that we have a prayer of making this happen in 2015. I think we have a prayer of getting it started and making huge progress. Now, with God, all things are possible. You know David took down the giant. But remember, he expected a little harder fight. He took 5 stones, not just 1. So if God's for us, who could be against us? The battle is the Lord's. If you're a believer, you believe that. But I'm just trying to be honest with you and tell you that though I'm not an authority on our legislature, I've been there for 2 years, and though we have a number of real Christians there, they do not have a biblical worldview. They do not understand the things that you just saw on this screen about our founding and about government. They do not understand the role of the states. They do not understand the authority of the states. They don't even believe that we're a union. They believe we're a nation. And that everything that we do must have rubber stamp from D.C. Therefore, everything we do must mirror what they do, which was my argument in the presentation. Well, then why are we even needed?
Right.
Yeah. If all we're to do is mirror D.C., we're useless. We're just an unuseful, redundant step in the process that's in a very expensive step. So, I just want to tell you that this will be the fight of our lives. CNN, PMS, NBC, the Washington Compost, the New York Slimes, all of them will be here. You know that. You know they will be here. And they will make us look like radical idiots. They will do everything within their power. So we better pray, and we better be ready for a fight of our lives, because that's what this will be. And we can't do it without the funding. To do a weak, limp-wristed attempt at this, in my opinion, as much as I hate abortion, would be worse than to do nothing at all right now. So, just my word to you, pray for me as a legislator. I'm willing to run this legislation. I'm willing to go down in flames over it. That's okay. That's not a problem. But if we're going to fight the fight, let's fight a good fight, not a weak, silly fight. So, that's my word to you, Paul. Close us out.
Currently, we have 25% of the funding raised. We've got over $125,000 raised, and we've hardly gotten started. As Dan said, we are going to have to educate. What you saw in this 35-minute video needs to be common knowledge to the majority conservative voters in the state of Oklahoma and Christians in the state of Oklahoma. That's why the media campaign is necessary. If we could have had 3 million Okies come to our Reclaiming America for Christ conference 3 weeks ago, we wouldn't need this. Taught this for free. We will not even begin this effort if we can't raise the money. If we can't raise the money, my commitment to the people when I stood up on the platform is we're raising money for this specific project. We've got record of everybody that's donated. If we can't raise the money, we're sending the money back. And we're just going to say, well, it was a nice thought, and go about our business. I want you to know how close we are to doing this. With the people in this room, if everyone in this room committed to that $1.35 a day, $10 a week, we would have another $50,000. We're already at over 125. If everybody in this room that claims to be patriot, by the way, there's a big difference between those that talked patriotism at the local tavern and then actually answered the bell and stood in Lexington Green when the redcoats showed up. But with what we have in this room, if you all, just what we have in this room, if you took, and we have reproduced these DVDs, they are free up here. This will all be on our website. If you currently do not get our Reclaiming America for Christ emails, come give me your email address and mailing address, and we will keep you up to date. Up here we have a cover letter for you about what we're doing. We have a copy of the DVD that you just saw, plus we have an envelope for your pledge. But if every person in this room would commit themselves and recruit 5 other people to do $45 a month for the next 12 months, we're there. Now let me ask you, is that really too big? If we can't raise the money, recognizing what an easy hill this is, we're not going to attempt it. It will win. We need the support of the people. Join us. All this information is up here at the front.
I'm going to close it out here. My wife and I signed up to contribute $50 a month while we were at the reclaiming thing. I'm willing, if we can get 10 of you to make that commitment, to up ours to $75 a month. And Rayford Brown is going to kick in another $500. If we can get 20 of you to do that $45 a month, we'll up ours to $100 a month, and Rayford said he'll kick in $1,000. So I'd like to see a show of hands. How many of you here would be willing to get on board with this? That's not on board with it right now. Let me hang on just a second here. I got to see if there's 20 of us here. It looks like there is. Not if you've already done it. I'm talking about people that haven't done it yet. Okay? People haven't done it yet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay. All right. Thank you, folks. Come up here. Your commitments are here.